Peace, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Edible Activist Podcast. I am your host and your very, very, very favorite edible activist in the whole entire world. Welcome back to the Edible Activist Show. Melissa L. Jones here. We had a bit of a tech hiccup yesterday, but you know what? Greatness cannot be stopped. So we are back today with a live, and I'm super excited because one monkey don't stop no show. So just a few housekeeping things before we get started. As a reminder, if you have not subscribed to Food Talks in Color on YouTube, please go ahead. Food Talks in Color on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. If you have watched the show, if you've liked it, like it with a thumb. Okay, love it with your heart, but also share it because sharing is caring. But no, for real, y'all, it actually helps with our numbers. It helps get the word out. Most importantly, it helps to continue to amplify the voices of those who show up on my podcast. Like they lend their time and their expertise and their experiences and their journeys. And this is really great content. So I really want this shared. So if you like it, love it with your heart, also share it, but also subscribe. So awesome. So also, rep your set. Where are you tuning in from? Drop a line in the chat. Do not leave us hanging. I see Buffalo back in the building. Shout out to Buffalo Dandelion Haven. Love the name. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Ooh, one other thing. As a reminder, in addition to YouTube, we are also still on iTunes. Many of you have actually been following Edible Activists for quite some time. We started out with just audio at the Line Hotel in DC. And though we don't do too many in-person shows anymore, we've transitioned over to virtual. These episodes still get uploaded to Simplecast. You can listen on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. If you are an iTunes user, and I believe on Spotify as well, go ahead and rate the show. We really appreciate it, and let us know how you're loving the show and how you feel about it. So just wanted to squeeze that in as well. So, all right, like I said, we had a bit of a tech hiccup yesterday, but we're back because greatness cannot be stopped. So for today's show, again, I'm super excited to have Ruth Tyson on the show, who is first time being on the show, I guess officially, but no stranger to the food space. And so we will be talking all things food justice, advocacy, food apartheid, foraging, which I'm super excited to just dive into just a bit more, and agroforestry. So Ruth has been doing some really amazing things out in this space and leading this work in those three areas, and more specifically agroforestry. That's another thing that I'm super excited to get into. So just as a brief intro, because Ruth is going to tell you all about who she is, but Ruth is a native to Prince George's County. For those who are not familiar, it is a county in Maryland. Shout out to PG. Prince George's County, though. Y'all say Prince George's County. Ruth is also, she's a plant lover and a naturalist at heart, and committed to building sovereign, sustainable, transparent, and just local food communities. Again, Ruth is no stranger to this space. I always have a pleasure of bumping into Ruth and shared spaces and connections here in the DC area. And so I am going to invite Ruth into my virtual stage and make sure he's unmuted. Hey, Ruth, thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Why did tech want to mess with us yesterday? Like, what's up with that?
They just wanted us to get a little nap in.
That's it. You know what? It's our farmers and our growers and our organizers and our activists, like, y'all deserve naps. So you needed a nap. Okay. You needed that. So welcome again. Like I've said before, Ruth, you obviously first official time being on the podcast. We had talked about you joining me and sharing more of your journey and your experiences. I also had the lovely pleasure. I think when I first met you, I met your mom as well. So I was just so intrigued by just talking to both of you and just learning more about your work in this space. And obviously we bumped into each other a few times, a handful of times, and just shared spaces and have been able to connect, at farms in DC and just other, conferences and pre-pandemic, but our last meeting was post-pandemic, and we had an opportunity to get out and see each other at a farm in DC. So shout out to Dreaming Out Loud. But anyway, this is all about you. And so we're going to dive back in. And so I definitely, want to just kick the show off with just telling us like how you got started in this work. There's always a pre-story and a back story. And I know there's so many different lanes that kind of like landed you here, right? But let's name out some of those like significant moments in your life where you was just like, you know what? I think this whole food justice and organizing thing is for me. And I know that partly started with what you witnessed growing up in Prince George's County. So I'll pause there and just let you take us back to some of those significant moments that transpired and just really got you to the space of food justice work.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, I grew up in Prince George's County in Capitol Heights to be exact. And yeah, there wasn't a lot of like great institutional, things in the neighborhood. Like there wasn't a grocery store. Like there was a Safeway like 10 minutes down the street, but didn't have the best quality of things. It was either like moldy or like super expensive or things were always out. And so we had to, my mom, once she started being more like health conscious and like really wanting the best freshest food for us, would have to like drive us 20 minutes down the road to like go to Wegmans and get food for us. But I recognize that as a privilege that many folks in my community may not have had. um, and so yeah, I just didn't think about food at all until I went to college and like was studying sociology and environmental studies, and just like really thinking about the connection between humans and nature. um, and I was invited to volunteer at our campus farm, just like, planting seeds, harvesting, weeding, things like that. And, I realized through that work, one, that like growing food is amazing. Like it's just such a magical process to be able to see, a tiny little seed turn into this like big, beautiful plant that produces something that you can use to like then sustain your life, and that's tasty too. But also like helped me to see that like the biggest way that we interact with our natural world is through the food that we eat every day, right? Like 3 times a day, most of us, will eat something, but like don't really think about the fact that it came from the earth, right? And so farming is like one of the ways that you can most directly like benefit the planet and in turn be sustained by it. So yeah, I was volunteering at the campus farm, and after that, I was just like, yo, I need to tell everybody to grow their own food. Like we got to just set up these gardens in our backyard. I went home and started a compost bin like right outside my kitchen window, and was like throwing the scraps directly in there when I was cooking at home. And my mom was with it. Like you met her; she's always been into the gardening and stuff, and so she was really supportive of it. But still, it wasn't like a thing that was like reaching all the folks in my community. And so one of the first work things that I did for work was teach at a school, teaching young elementary school kids about gardening and cooking, just like healthy recipes and things like that. They were really excited about it. Like they would come out to the garden and just be like, Miss Ruth, let me have some Swiss chard, and like just eating it straight out the dirt. And I was like,
Oh, I love it.
yeah, I was very amused by that. And but I felt limited in my the impact that I was having, because they weren't eating those same things at home. I would ask them like, "Are you gonna eat some Swiss chard at home?" And they would be like, "Don't be ridiculous, Miss Ruth. Like my mom would never buy that." I think one of them said like, "My mom only buys chicken and cake or something like that." And I was just like, "Okay."
That's some folks' reality. Yeah, if you hadn't mentioned Swiss chard to me growing up, I would have looked at you sideways. Did not know what that
Yeah,
was.
for sure. Me either. That's the
Yeah.
thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I was just like, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm not actually reaching the parents who, have the wallets, have the access to transformation,
Mm.
who like run the kitchens and things like that. And it's not even just a matter of choice for them. It's not that they're like, I don't want my child to have healthy food. It's like, do they have the time to like experiment with recipes? Do they
Right.
have access to the grocery store, transportation, and things like that? And so that's when I started thinking more about policy. And like through a program with DC Greens, my friend Asha at the time was running a community advocates program, where I was able to learn like the local landscape, like the different organizations that were doing what kind of work, like the different policies like Produce Plus that would supplement folks' SNAP dollars to be able to get more funding to buy fresh produce, and just like different incentive programs like that. And I was like, this is where I want to be next, So I started doing national policy advocacy, and since then, just like really bopping around all of the aspects of food justice and seeing, how I can be useful to the community. Um,
Yeah.
and
Oh
Yeah.
no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so right now I'm actually working with a farmers market in PG County, like 10 minutes from where I grew up, which is really amazing. It's like for us, by us, people who are from PG, black, who primarily are entrepreneurs of color and farmers of color. We've been sourcing most of our produce this year from farmers in PG County, which is amazing.
That's dope.
Yeah, and so it's a really nice community effort and something that I wish I had growing up. So it's really nice to be able to participate in the way that's like I'm able to support building, building up our community in this way. Um, also do some work with agroforestry consulting, trying to figure out ways to support farmers of color, BIPOC farmers getting into agroforestry, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. And yeah, things like that is how I spend my time nowadays.
Just out in the dirt, here and there, and at the farmers
Yeah,
market, selling amazing produce grown by really dope folks. I mean, it sounds like the life to me.
yeah, it is a great life.
Yes, that's awesome. That's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned, and I know jokingly, but really for real though, just how you kind of like bopped around, but like the whole, food system, as I like to explain it, is like this big wheel, and there's so many different spokes, right? There
Yeah,
isn't just one spoke. It isn't just growing the food. There's also policy. There's organizing.
right,
Then there's the activism. Like how can I reach the parent? It's community. It's so many things, and so there's labor. There's so many issues and so many acts, right, of
right.
justice, and so I just wanted to name that because it's super important and it's very easy, or maybe not physically easy, but I can see how one could, you would have one interest in one area, but then you on to the next because you're not the first person to say, like, I started out with growing and then I went over to policy because that's where maybe this may be a little bit controversial, but where a lot of change can happen, has happened, right? Just really having that policy and that legislature. So I appreciate you naming that. So, and shout out to Capitol Heights Farmers Market. I haven't been. I need to go. I'm going to show up. I love it. So, and I believe, when did I first learn of the Capitol Heights Farmer Market? Maybe through Brittany Drakeford. Yes.
Probably, yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. So and actually, I love Capitol Heights. Let me just say that. Like, I love Prince George's County, but also, I don't know, I love Capitol Heights. Didn't grow up there, but there's so much history rooted in Prince George's County too, which is a whole
Definitely.
nother conversation, which I know you're all
Yeah,
the way familiar with. But just really taking time to really understand the landscape of Prince George's County, I think is just a whole nother journey, a whole nother amazing journey to uncover. But thank you for sharing that. So definitely want to, I know that foraging is something that you are, just, it's a delight. It's a, I don't want to use the word passionate, but it's something that, that you enjoy doing. I know it's something that you have been exploring for quite some time. And I know when I hear the word foraging, I'm like, ooh, I've done it before. I don't know that I can get out and forage and not look to my left and to my right to see what's crawling around me. Okay. But all to be serious though, foraging, I definitely want to dive into it and also really talk to how can we get more color folks out here. Foraging like really is a thing and it's how our ancestors survive, right? Like having that internal wisdom to know, okay, like you can eat this berry, but don't eat that. This is
mhm,
for medicinal uses, this isn't. And so there really
right.
is so much that goes into foraging. It is an art, it is a science. And so I really want to tap into that. And also maybe by the end of that, persuade some of us to get out there so we
Yeah.
can actually forage. So let's talk about foraging for a bit.
Cool. Yeah. So I got into foraging just kind of happenstance, honestly. Like it wasn't even a thing that I thought about, like because I wasn't as informed about plants, like growing up, a tree was a tree. Like I had no idea there were different types of trees and that you could like distinguish them by like their bark. I mean, obviously they have different leaf patterns, but I just thought that there was different shapes, like, but
A
this
tree
is
is a tree,
a
right?
tree is a tree. And like all the other plants, like there are so many different types of plants, right? So it wasn't even a thing that occurred to me that like there are these edible plants that are all around us. But I was at an event at Three Part Harmony Farm like maybe 7 years ago. Um, and there was a plant walk that was hosted by Holly Poole Kavana, who runs Little Bit Redbird Botanicals. And she was just like walking us around this 2 acre plot. Like, honestly, she probably walked us around a space that was like less than 50 feet and was able to point out 10 different plants that had all of these edible or medicinal benefits. And I was just like mind blown. And I was like, from that point on, I was like, I really just need to know about everything going on around me. And so the way that I, informed myself was just signing up for things that I saw, like going on plant walks with people who had been foraging for a while, and eventually just like researching things on the internet and like getting books and just like learning botany, which is like how you'll be able to forage safely. So being able to know the difference between those things, like the bark patterns of trees or like the leaf shapes of little plants and any colorations or things that you might want to use to be able to discern what's poisonous and what's not and what type of things grow together. um, but yeah, definitely what you're saying about like I want to see more of us out there is has definitely been a theme. On all these plant walks I go on, it's just like mostly white people. Like I'm honestly often the only black person there, and it's one thing to like be alone, as in like not see your folks there, but there are so many cultural things that come up in those spaces, like them talking
Mm.
about like their ancestors and like, yeah, when we were in Europe, we used to use this. I was just like, I wasn't in Europe with y'all, like I
At
wasn't
all.
there. Or like saying like, yeah, and if this plant really reminds me of our skin color, I'm like, that's not my skin color. So it's like it's really important to have just that representation, because it's not for us the way that they're teaching those things. Sometimes I'm not going to say all of them.
Yeah.
um but also just like the ancestral like relationship building that indigenous folks had with the land and the plants around them. They weren't isolating them in the way that like science does now. It's like, oh, let me study this specimen and like think about it as the gifts that it has to offer me. And I'm going to extract it from the forest and use it for my own benefit.
Hmm.
But like this really like reciprocating energy and like understanding the spirit and essence of plants and not just taking from them, like asking the plant for permission and like making sure that if I'm going to take something, I'm leaving something. So like I've been harvesting a lot of pawpaws recently, right? So I've been using those seeds and like trying to plant them and make sure that I'm starting new pawpaw patches places so that that plant
Oh.
is able to sustain its life and evolve and things like that. So just thinking about how I can give, not just take, to each plant. But yeah, I've really just been trying to learn, and like I'm in those spaces so that I can create more spaces for us, and I'm not the only one, definitely, but like the Black Forager has been really popular lately
Mm.
on the internet, and she's been spreading the good news about the things that we see so often but don't even think about eating, and really creative ways to prepare them too. So yeah, definitely highly recommend that folks try it at
I'll
least.
try it, but with guidance, with someone
For
who
sure.
knows. So my mom and I, we did a foraging tour with Niraj at Cultivate the City,
Yeah.
and it was amazing. Now we did see a couple snakes, and when we saw one person running, I was like, "Do we run too?" And like, sorry not to scare. This is probably not persuading anyone to forage, but I'm just letting y'all know what my real experience was. But just being able to point out like a mulberry tree, right? And to
Yeah.
taste the mulberries. It's just it's
Hmm.
amazing. And it is a thing that, I know for me, I would have to be more intentional about and just want to be more intentional about. But I'm so glad that cuz we talk, there's a lot of conversation around like building relationships with plants and building relationships with the land, right? But I'm glad that you lean into like not just taking, but asking for permission, but also like giving back. And so, because I was going to say, can you, I mean, that's a obvious example, like replanting it so it can sustain. It's an entire
Yeah.
ecosystem, right?
Right, right.
So I'm so glad that you lean into that. I guess what is one thing, not that we're here to like pull anybody's leg to go out and start foraging tomorrow, but like, do you have any suggestions or advice other than just being open for like how more folks of color can get on the space? And I'm sorry that was your experience when you first started foraging and being in a space with people who did not look like you, because I can only imagine like how that must have felt. But how can we, like, do we need to, are there like black foraging groups, like what can we promote, like what are some tips or guidance that you feel, may not get them out there tomorrow, but just start to think about, so at
Yeah.
least open to the idea of foraging.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly don't know of any like black foraging groups. Like I know folks who like go on foraging walks and things, and
Yeah.
I know at least one other black person, Dr. Yu, in the area that like takes
Hmm.
people on foraging walks. And I just started doing plant walks through the capital market actually, so
Oh,
they
okay.
will hopefully have some more coming up. Um, but yeah, as far as groups, that's something that I'd be open to. If anybody's interested, let's get it started. Like we could have a little group chat or whatever and just go on regular walks.
Because I
But
was
yeah.
about to say, tag, you're it, Ruth. Not to put more on your plate, but I'm glad that you mentioned the plant walks at the farmers market because that can be a start. You know, showing up
For
for the
sure.
farmers market and then tapping in that way. But I would love to see, you know, a group of black folks and people of color who are showing up and open to the idea of foraging and starting the discussions. I would love to see that.
Yeah. And the thing is like it really just requires courage in any way. Like I think a lot of times the fear, the same way we were talking about farming yesterday, like there's this like cultural or internalized epigenetic like aversion to like being in the soil in that way
Mm,
because we were oppressed in that. And
yes.
same with the woods, but like culturally, like I know growing up, even today, like as a person who is very confident in identifying certain things, like my grandma would be like, "Don't put that in your mouth," and I'm just like, I'm grown. Like I know I'm not about to poison myself, but like they will definitely like be like, don't eat that, don't go in the woods. There's poisonous, there's scary things. Like that's a thing that has been ingrained in
Yeah.
so many of us in our lives. And like, yeah, snakes are scary, but like that's something that you can combat with information, right? Like,
Yeah.
how can I learn when I see a snake in the wild, how do I respond to that? Like how do I
Mm,
equip myself with information about poison ivy to know that like it's not just a thing that I need to be afraid of. It could be anywhere, but like learning,
yeah.
where it grows, how it grows and its different phases of growth so that if I do see it, I can protect myself against it. Um, Things like that to just like prepare yourself, like
Mm-hmm.
identifying within yourself what is holding me back from this experience. What am I
Mm,
afraid of? What is it that I need to be comfortable in this?
yeah.
Is it a buddy? Do I need to invite my family member, my best friend, my partner, or whatever to feel more comfortable in this experience? So that's like an internal process, right? But yeah, definitely connecting with community, reading. There's a really good book called braiding sweetgrass that I read, and that like
Braiding sweetgrass. Oh,
braiding,
okay.
yeah, which is by a woman called Robin Wall Kamara. And she is a ethnobotanist, so like studies plants, but also people and culture, and is an artist, and like is just a really brilliant writer. And talks about foraging and like the relationships of plants in the forest and their ecosystems, and the relationship with humans in a really beautiful way. And I think it really like grounds the values and ethics around foraging that I think are necessary for anyone to that is interested. Like it's not a thing you just go out and do and start taking
Yeah.
stuff. It's like how do I really like understand, how to be an ethical participant in this world, right?
Mm,
So things like considering, like, I can't take all the berries in this patch because the birds might need some, the deer might need some, and the plant needs some because those are the seeds and they need to be able to reproduce. Like some of them need to just fall to the ground and be planted, right?
mm-hmm.
So things like that.
Oh, wow. And I almost feel like, you know, tapping back into like, your our inner youth, right? I remember like coming up, I wasn't afraid of anything really. Like my sister and I, times have changed. We didn't have, yeah, we had Nintendo, okay, but we were outside all day, climbing
Right.
trees, touching the sap. That was fun. Probably even tasted it. I remember us. We had a blackberry tree right outside the building that we grew up in, and no one told us that we couldn't eat it. And so we would eat the blackberries and we would be all up running down hills into the forest, everything, not thinking of poison ivy or none of that. And so
Yeah.
it just has me thinking as you get up in age, right? Like I'm 40. I'm proud to say I'm 40. I just turned 40.
Hey, happy
And
birthday.
hey, thank you. And so it's just like, where did all this like reservation, hesitation, like fear, like it really is something to really tune into and just ask yourself because coming up, what? You want me to
Yeah.
run into the forest, dude? I am there. Okay. And you talking to someone, my sister and I, we taught ourselves how to swim. My parents didn't know how to swim, like all the things. But it's definitely something to consider as part of the journey, and getting into just even reintroducing yourself back to the land and foraging and stuff like that, because I'm like, I didn't have this, I wasn't one eye open, one eye closed, when I was out in the forest. Now I'm like, what's
Yeah.
out there?
Yeah.
One other thing that I wanted just mention about foraging before we move on is yesterday, before we were rudely interrupted by tech, someone had said something to you about foraging being like a wild thing or something. And I just really want you to
Mm.
restate that, because I just
Oh
like
yeah.
lit a whole like light inside of me. And I was like, ooh, ooh, okay. I
Yeah.
like the way that sounds.
Right, right. Yeah, so one of the first like big, like official plant walks that I went on was led by a person called Eric Joseph Lewis, I believe. And he was the first time that I had a person like really introduce that spiritual aspect of foraging, of like asking the plant for permission and like, making sure that you're building a relationship. Um, and he encouraged everyone to eat something wild every day, right? And he talked about his reasoning, and like talked about the fact that agriculture, both like, for one, is like not as nutrient dense. The food that comes from modern agriculture isn't nutrient dense because the nutrients are being stripped from the soil because of those industrial farming practices. So you're not getting as much nutrients as folks were like centuries ago, um, and or you could have centuries ago. And the other is like just the energy of that food is like, if you have things that are being planted in these straight rows that are like very manufactured and like domesticated, right? Like if you have a wild horse and you have a thing called breaking its spirit, where you literally whip it into domestication to the point where like humans can ride it, right? That's a different animal at the end of it, right? Like it's not a wild horse, it's a domestic horse. So
Oh.
like I'm feeling the same thing with plants, right? Like a wild plant that just kind of like naturally generates itself, and is planted in the forest and like is amongst its you folks in its natural habitat, versus a thing that has been systemically taken out of its environment, given much less space or much more space, whatever it is, and forced to generate in this unnatural way. Like it's just a different energy, right? And like as
Mm.
humans, if we strive to be more wild, like there's like a rewild movement, right? If we strive to be more wild, then we might want to eat more wild foods to be able to internalize that kind of energy, right? Like I'm not just going to eat these foods that come from this big box store or even the farmers market, but I'm going to get some of that wild energy, which is both diversifying my gut biome, um, and in encouraging in me the ways that I want to nurture my own wild personality, like those thoughts that I have, those feelings that I have that are like weird and like not within any box that I've found in society or our culture or whatever. I'm going to encourage those to grow because that is my individual contribution to the ecosystem, right? So being able to tap into and manifest and grow your own wilderness, you can do through being in the wild and consuming the wild, literally.
We can end this show right now, okay? Because that was everything, okay?
Yeah.
Man, y'all see why I have these conversations? Y'all, these folks are smarter than me. I don't know anything. I just host the conversation. I ask the question and they run with it. That is, oh my goodness. Like I can't even break that into words. Like I pulled so much from that, and I need somebody to make a T-shirt because I'm always giving someone an idea. You know how many T-shirt ideas that I've given away here? Like wild energy something. I need that on a shirt. I don't care if there's 50 million other people. We made the shirt.
Mm,
Make your own version.
okay.
There's a
Yeah, make
product for
your
everyone
own.
here. It's like there's a million brands of cereal. Like you get the concept. Like that's it. I love that. I do. And as someone who has actually, I've been very excited. I mentioned this before on shows that I've been getting subscribed to three-part Harmony's Farm CSA,
Ooh.
and it has been everything for me and to me, okay? And even more so committed to, even though this is, kind of derailing from foraging, but y'all get what I mean. Just getting more soil rich food. I need that. I am committed to eating more soil rich food as hyper locally as I possibly can by people who I know who have grown it, cultivated it, because I'm in this place, my system needs that, okay?
Mhm.
And I'm a wild thing. So how about
Hey,
that?
a wild thing. Right. Exactly.
I love that. And you just like really gave me additional permission to just really like just, be that wild thing. Like this. So thank you for sharing that with me. That's awesome. All right. So before we wrap up, you guys talk about one more thing, but I'm still on wild thing and foraging in the inner wilderness and all that. But y'all will catch that. Y'all replay, because that was everything. So agroforestry, when I had bumped into you, Ruth, a few months ago over the summertime, spring, um, I know this is something that you and I had chatted about, and it's something you were getting into and learning more about, and really working to really learn about what further opportunities in agroforestry. First of all, to spread the gospel, to educate more people about it, but also just you really doing some really incredible work in working with farmers of color to let them know of opportunities in agroforestry. So before I dive in, because I can't tell y'all what it is, Ruth is going to really give us a spill on agroforestry and some of the work that Ruth has been doing, some of the consulting work that she's able to speak to as much as she can, but some of the research as well that you've been doing around agroforestry, because this is something that we actually have never talked about on the show. So I would love to expand upon it during this conversation.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, agroforestry, as the name implies, is agriculture and forestry put together. Um, so it's basically most like vegetable farmers in the States, if they're traditional or conventional, are just growing vegetables, and then this like in rows, right? Like just rows, either diversified rows or just like monoculture rows of vegetables. Um, and as I mentioned before, that's like kind of unnatural, right? Like if you look in a forest, there's like all these different species who are, working together to create an ecosystem. So those plants, combined, eat both supply different nutrients to the soil and like take different nutrients from for the soil, but like they all balance each other out. So when you mess that natural process up, it creates problems for the ecosystem ultimately, right? Like the invisible little microbes that are all in the soil, the root systems like the mycelium network, which is like a whole like really cool amazing thing that I can't even get to, but mushrooms basically have this invisible like underground like root system that communicate between the trees and help them to exchange nutrients and things like that. But yeah, so agroforestry is basically trying to replicate those natural systems by interweaving perennial crops with annual crops. So perennials are things that grow for more than 1 year, um, or more than 2 years, like they're regenerating every year. Basically, annuals, as the name implies, are like things that grow and then you take them out of the soil, they're dead for that year after they produce. So you can have like the USDA has like 5 different practices that they call agroforestry. One is like windbreaks, which is just like using trees at the edge of your property to stop the wind from like coming in and damaging your crops. The other is like one is like riparian buffers, which is helping at the edge of your property, like if there's any waterways, helping nutrients or
Mm-hmm.
any pollutants from stopping to run in the water. Which is a big environmental justice issues in some areas.
Yep.
And then you have alley cropping, which is like you can still have those rows of annual crops, but you might plant like shrubs on the outside. So like, and that system evolves where you'll have like, say, collard greens or something in the middle, and then you have like some raspberry bushes on the outside of that. And then you have like some bigger trees that you plant, like fruit trees, nut trees, or even timber trees. And as those trees are getting bigger and bigger, you're changing the things on the inside based on how much sunlight they need, how much space they need. And so it's a system that like you can invest in these long-term crops or things like that won't be ready in 10, 15, 20 years, while also continuing to get income on those smaller crops and the annuals and, the shorter term perennials. And then you have silvopasture, which is like integrating your livestock with trees, either by having your livestock go into a forest that exists already and like having them forage for themselves or like find whatever food is in there. Or you can plant trees in the pasture that they're already grazing in. Um, and that's just like adding the root system, protecting from wind, all the other benefits of having trees on your property. And then the last that they have defined is forest farming. So like planting in the understory of a forest. So if there's an existing forest, you can have like mushroom crops or herbs or anything that can be grown in the shade interweaved into the forest. Um, and that's like this really modern like definition of agroforestry, but this is a practice that like our ancestors have done
Mm-hmm.
all over the world, right? Like I'm really interested in that aspect of it, like returning to more natural ways of being and like, being in relationship with the forest and our food. But like a lot of like what we think of as wild, like even the Amazon forest has been shaped by indigenous peoples and them like planting cocoa trees and like, different fruit trees that they were domesticating, but like it just seems wild, right? Um, so yeah, I'm really curious about how we can return to that. And right now, the project that I'm working on is figuring out how specifically to get BIPOC farmers involved in agroforestry. So there's like a lot of interest, but not a lot of support, right? Like it doesn't just require interest. Like we were talking about foraging earlier. It's not just I want to go eat things, but like what do I eat? How, like how much do I eat of it? Um, and that information isn't as accessible. So even like technical service providers like USDA agents and people like that don't have like a very clear, some of them don't have a very clear estimate of how much it costs to implement certain projects. So therefore they can't provide the funding or they can't assist with like the details of like the steps to follow. Um, and so we're working on the technical aspect of that, but also the cultural aspects, because a lot of these agents and folks are white, and there's this a long history of
Mm-hmm.
USDA and other agencies like just discriminating against people of color. Like folks have probably heard of the Pickford trials, where black farmers in the South sued the USDA for literally just like ruining their businesses, telling them that they lost their papers when they had loans that they were depending on and things like that, and they ended up losing so much land. So that kind of like cultural divide still exists. There's like either mistrust of those folks, or they just don't know how to talk to people in our communities, right? So we're trying to understand like what are some of the barriers, like what can be done to like kind of bridge those worlds to make sure that we are moving this work forward and that folks have access to what they need. So right now I'm just doing interviews and like hearing from folks what they need, and we're eventually that'll lead to an online curriculum that will be for technical service providers, just like really wanting to understand that cultural aspect of the work.
That is amazing, Ruth. I so look forward to the outcome. I know it's not a one and done, but just the work that you've been leading and just starting, and I know doing like those interviews, just to get a read on what folks are thinking and just to gauge interest is where you start, right? And then the educating piece. So that is super awesome. What has been some of the response? And not that you need to share any like for commentary like verbatim, but just what has been the response to agroforestry and just really gauging some of the interest and trying to get more farmers of color into this space.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, with most parts of agriculture, like the biggest barrier for folks is land, right? Like, do I have
Yeah,
access to land? Period, is a
yeah.
big barrier. But then, like, do I have long-term access to land? Is another thing, right?
Hello, say that
Because,
again. Long term, because they'll
right,
hit you with a okay 2 years. You blink your eyes, and it's like 2 years is
right.
up.
What am I supposed
Yeah,
to do with that? Like, um,
exactly.
yeah, so with agroforestry, if you're thinking about trees, right? Like the tree is gonna be a baby for 2 years, right? Like I need 7 years at least, hopefully generations for these trees to be able to
Mm-hmm.
really produce in a way that's like viable for a business, because they're very cost heavy up front, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a big barrier for agroforestry if they don't have a long-term lease or own the land in some way. Um, and yeah, again, as I said, the education, like the people that do have access to land, and want to start doing agroforestry may not know like the best ways to do it, and it's just like the internet can't really teach you as much. So it's good to have people that can go out and show you like your specific landscape, what would be the best flow of different crops, a system for both the business that you want to have and like the actual uh yeah, the land setup that you have. I don't know the technical term for that. Um, so yeah, and yeah, as far as culturally, like working with those folks, I'm hearing that like privacy is a big thing. Like there's all these small town dynamics. So they're, the people that have the land are out in the country somewhere, and there's maybe tension between the neighbors, especially if they're the only like folks of color there. So people are always watching. If they start a new like radical project, there's like even more eyes and more judgment. And like working with technical service providers can be one of the biggest ways to like have gossip spread, right? Like if you get a grant, for example, like somehow you go to the store and everybody knows that you got that grant, and
Yeah.
you may not want people knowing your business like that. Um, and just like how you communicate, how you find people, like it's word of mouth usually. So sometimes people will go into the office and like ask about a specific grant that they heard about from their farmer friend, and like the agent will be like, I never heard of that, or like let me check and like get back to you, and that could potentially cost them $100,000 in like what they could have had access to, but the agent either wasn't educated or didn't know about it, like, but that could be anything. So um yeah, we're still having those conversations and really trying to get, a clear analysis, but it's kind of the same story, with that we've been hearing, and people just like don't want to give up power in certain ways. So that's a big part of it. But yeah, like you said, there's no guarantee that the work that we're doing will completely transform everything, but we're really just trying to push that conversation forward, and do what we can, with the time that we have.
That sounds like a lot of work. And I want to say thank you for leading this work and giving your flowers. And if no one has told you as of late, you are doing a really great job. And I just appreciate you and every other brown folks in this space. So thank you so much. That means a lot. Just to have you, being, I'm sure, there's some others, partners and other individuals, but thank you because it's a lot and it's really needed. And the land conversation is a complicated one, not even just yes, stemming from history. Yes, it's all stemming from history, but just, you know, in general, you think about family, you think about like just what you name to the neighbor. It's complicated. I feel like we just have a whole series about land, whole
Yeah.
nother conversation. It
Mm-hmm.
is. It is. So, Ruth, I dropped your Instagram handle in the chat, but let folks know from your mouth verbally where to find you at on the interwebs. If they want to reach out to you and follow you, I encourage you all to. Ruth is again just really doing some dynamic things. So let them know where to find you.
Yeah, planet jumping. That's everything spelled normal. PLANETG not G. JUMPING. um, that's my personal handle. For the capital market, the farmers market in Capitol Heights. It's the capital market spelled with an A, so CAPITAL. Of 20743, which is the zip code in Capitol Heights. So the capital market of 20743. Um,
Awesome. Yes. And I'm actually going to drop that into the chat for folks. And I don't know if there's that's I'm doing a copy and paste and this is what I got. So, uh,
uh,
awesome. Okay. The capital market 207.
43.
43. I'm missing a number. All right, let me 43. I knew that wasn't right. The capital market 20743. All righty. Awesome. Okay, so before we officially wrap up, Ruth, one edible act that anybody can take today after listening to this show.
What edible act? Okay.
Okay, I give you two if you
Okay.
must.
Great. Yeah, they I'll make them go together so it makes sense. Okay. So
Yay.
one, go on a plant walk, like find a plant walk to be able to identify at least one edible thing in your area, right? And there's some things that'll be like specific to each season, and there's some things that might be available all year round, but find at least one thing that grows around you that you can eat. And two, eat it. Like try to eat something wild as often as you can. Like when I was living in DC, I literally would just like find things that I could eat in people's like gardens at the front, not gardens, but like front yards or whatever that I didn't think would be contaminated. Like I was safe about it. But on the way to work, I would literally find things to eat in DC. So I think it's more accessible than we think sometimes. So
I mean, well, yeah, because when we went on our foraging tour with Niraj, I mean, we're in just like we're in DC, just random like neighborhoods and just walking and their
yeah.
bushes are there.
Right.
pointing out everything. You near Costco, and it's just like, oh, here's another tree, growing such and
Right.
such. So, but again, with
With
guidance, don't
guidance,
parachute
yes.
out there thinking you see something that look like a berry. Like we are
Right.
not encouraging that. Okay, so reach
Right.
out to Ruth. Visit the market. Go on, do a plant walk with Ruth and the team at the market, and then once we get the foraging group popping, if that's what y'all want, let me know. Shoot me a DM. I'm at Food Talks in Color. Like I'm interested in that. And also my last tidbit. I love your Instagram handle, Planet Jumping T-shirt. I'm really gonna wrap with that. Wrap up with that.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please find Food Talks in Color on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. If you liked the show, I hope you did. You better had. Totally joking. Go ahead and like it and love it with your heart and share it because sharing is caring. You want to get the word out. This is really, really, truly amazing conversation. Ruth, thank you for showing up for me, for the show. So I appreciate all your wisdom and your guidance and your knowledge and look forward to having you back if you're willing to come back. So,
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this was great. Great talking
awesome.
to you, Melissa.
All right. Peace, y'all.
Bye.